Hey everyone, it is 7 o'clock in the East. It is 4 o'clock in the West. It is Tuesday, May 16th, and this is your strategy session for Tuesday. I want to welcome Stuart Stevens. Rick is on an airplane, and Joe will be joining us shortly. So, Stu, welcome. Thanks for kind of hanging
Thank you,
out with me
brother.
tonight.
Great to be here.
All right, so Joe, or sorry, Stuart, sorry. Sometimes
Joe's
we
coming.
we we so long as you call me, that's right. Sometimes we scratch our heads and say, why don't people pay more attention to what we spend a lot of time, most of our time on, which is, what what Donald Trump did to the country for 4 years, almost eight now, if you include the time that he was
Yeah.
running for office and since he's been out. And I get the sense after the CNN town hall last week, CNN we can get to, that it was,
hmm
at least from my perspective and for the folks that I talked to and that we talked to collectively, there was a little bit of a wake up call. People were like, oh my gosh, he's actually a real thing that might reappear.
Yeah, I think people become immune to it, and
Right.
they kind of forgotten what the full Trump is. Um, and probably there's some expectation that he might have changed. Um,
Right.
you know, Trying to overthrow the government, failing, all this stuff. Um, but that's Trump, and
Right.
he didn't change the party. He didn't change the party. The party changed and accepted him.
Yeah, and it's, and we should think about it as a movement, right? I guess that's how I see it,
100% is a movement.
which is
100%.
evolving in and of itself in almost real time. Hey, Joe, how are you? All right, he'll be here in a second. So, Stu, I'm going to keep talking to you. And so, it's weird that we've talked a little bit about this before, which is some days he's ahead and some days the movement is ahead, but they're certainly in
hmm
lockstep one way or the other. But it was classic Trump, right? He was nasty to Caitlin Collins. He made light of sexual assault, had the audience laughing with him, which was a built-in crowd, right? The kind of thing that I used to build for you many, many moons ago, for presidents and other people. Um, and I think by our count, he lied, almost 140 times in whatever it was, 60 or 75 minutes. And so, none of this is a surprise. I got a call from a reporter at a major outlet, said, "Do you think that his opponents can make use of this?" And I said, "They can. They absolutely should, but they won't, because none of them have the wherewithal to do so." And in fact, I just indulge me here for a second, Stu. I'm just as we were going to on the air here, I'm reading a Vanity Fair post. It says a DeSantis aligned PAC reportedly had to go into damage control mode after attacking Trump, and it was the DeSantis super PAC, and they posted a tweet that looks like something that you and I would have written on behalf of the Lincoln
Or,
Project. Here's
or
here's what he
any
did.
sane American. We
Fair
might
enough.
want to
Yes.
limit it down to.
Right. Here's this, here's that, here's this, here's that, here's this, here's that. All of the things that he's done over the years, and said, like, do you really want this guy back? And I thought, well, that's an interesting tack to sort of let DeSantis as the candidate, play to the crazy and let the superback play to the sane. But now, exactly what I said would happen, which is if only one of them's going to do it, they'll get picked off. But if they all went in together, they'd have a better shot. But of course, here we are.
Yeah, I heard this. The New York Times, in their pod, they interviewed Larry Hogan and Asa Hutchinson, both former clients of mine. And it was interesting. Hogan was just saying about DeSantis, what's with this guy? He's attacking Disney. Really? Like, is there a governor in America that doesn't want Disney? I don't know about it. Um, and he was talking about that he thought that DeSantis had changed, that he had dealt with him some in Congress when he was
Hmm.
governor, and that he seemed like a sort of normal person. And I think that that's ultimately the flaw of DeSantis, among others, is that he's he's a phony Trump. He's
Hmm.
chasing something rather than trying to be, what he is, which is probably he's not a dumb guy, um, and he's a guy who has let ambition conquer any sort of sense of why he's doing this other than to get elected. And I think if people are given a choice between, a phony Trump and a real Trump, why not go with the real Trump?
Yeah, and Joe, so yeah, it's sort of the devil you know versus the other devil
It's more
you sort
fun
of know.
too. Trump enjoys this.
Well, that's the thing, Joe, right? He puts on a show. For him, it's all this, all the world's a stage, and he wants to stomp around on it.
We got
Well, I think you're on mute, Joe. All right, well, I'm going to just keep talking. So, Stuart, to your point, though, I wanted to say something
yeah,
about Disney because, um, I was thinking about this is there used to be a time when Republicans said that Democrats were out of touch elitists. They were in New York, they were in Los Angeles, they were in San Francisco, Washington D.C. Washington D.C. is out of touch with the real world. But now what you see with this era of Republicans is very not only culture wars. They've always fought culture wars, and not to say that the Dobbs decision is a niche thing, but they're going into things that are further and further away from
yeah,
the things that folks have to worry about, on a daily basis, whether or not it's
yep,
job, inflation, whatever the case might be. But there are also things that concern people, like you know, why are you banning books? Wait, why are you defunding libraries? Why are you, passing this crazy law, passing this crazy law? And then you got McCarthy and those guys in D.C., trying to cut regulatory deals on energy production in the midst of a debt ceiling, crisis where it just doesn't appear that they have any sense of how real Americans live. And I think Republicans, at least when I was there, always wanted to believe we had a sense of what, Ma and Pa Kettle had to deal with.
yeah. There's no coherent governing philosophy under it. I mean, say
Right.
what you will about Elizabeth Warren, she can articulate a theory of government. You can disagree with it, you can love it, but she'll argue with you, and it will be
Right.
an argument that's not based on alternative facts. Um, And in absent of that, you just have this sort of who can be the loudest and the craziest. And I keep talking about this. If I ran the Democratic Party, I would embrace culture wars because you're winning them.
Right.
Most Americans, uh, they're okay with Nike. They're okay with Disney. They're not mad at their whole sense of self has not been challenged by one label on one beer. I mean, they think that, well, like maybe I can drink another beer if I want to. It doesn't become like who they are. And a lot of this is defining who your enemies are in politics. Like, what are you trying to do? So, I
Yeah.
mean, maybe I'm crazy, but when the Republican Party was like taking on communism, taking on the Soviet Union,
Hmm.
Mr. Gorbachev tear down this wall seems more important to me than like Disney don't say gay or take this beer label off. It's just a
Right.
smallness of purpose and intent that ultimately most Americans they're not mad at the world, and it goes to this. I was really struck. It is New Hampshire, but that focus group that they did after the New Hampshire thing, the CNN did, right?
Right.
And I was just struck, like, they're all white. This isn't
It is New
America.
Hampshire.
Yeah, I mean, it is New Hampshire, but 85% of Trump's coalition was white. The country is 59, 60% white and changing all the
Hmm.
time. And I mean, that is the great strength of the Democratic Party. But it also is, they always talk about how it's Republicans message more clearly. Well, a lot of that is when you're only talking to those one group of white people, it's a lot easier to message to them.
Well,
It's
sure.
like
I mean, it's homogeneous, right?
it's homogeneous.
It's
It's like
taught,
putting on a concert for people that like one kind of music. It's
right.
easy. I'll give them what they want.
Well, that's you
Whatever
just
it
talked
is.
about it, right? Which is you wouldn't take a bunch of Gordon Lightfoot fans and send them to a Sex Pistols concert, right?
Yeah, I mean
Like,
it's
that would not be that would
and
probably not be a fun evening for anybody, either on stage or in the crowd, right?
and this is what Biden has been able to do. He did in the primary. He's been able to do to build that coalition, and to keep the elements of the Democratic coalition together, which ultimately is going to be the challenge for next year. Will he be able to hold that coalition together?
Yeah, and well, no, and I think that Joe, can you hear us?
I can hear you. Can you hear
And
Ah,
me?
we can hear
and we
you.
can hear you.
Oh, I'm
Okay,
back.
this was
Sorry.
perfect timing. Okay, this was a better question for you than the last one I asked you anyway. Okay, so Stuart was just talking about the fact that the president was able to build, I think, an ad hoc coalition in 20, to get across the line. I think that both the Democrats, but I think also individually those gubernatorial candidates in those key swing states did a really good job of being, normal, otherwise human beings. But Stewart said we're going to have to recreate that coalition in 24. So what do the White House and other Democrats have to do to make that possible when we know that we've got a president of the United States who's trying to do his job, and the other part, which is like it's like an entire party jumping off that train and like the fugitive, right? Like the whole thing is a crazy town.
Yeah, no, look, I mean, it's pretty clear we got to follow. I think the party and the pro-democracy coalition has to follow Biden's lead. This is and define this as more freedom versus less freedom, more rights
Mm-hmm.
versus fewer rights.
Yep.
Um, to and to look, there are wings in the Democratic Party, but there's no room for wings now. This is everybody who's for democracy, independents, Republicans, former Republicans, moderates, whatever. Forget about your "I want it my way" stuff. This is about one thing only: preserving democracy. It is about freedom versus less, and that means all the work that we did in 2020 and 2022, we got to keep doing. We got to keep building it. The union,
Hmm.
the taking on Fox, continuing to fight the disinformation, the lies, and also calling the media on it when they keep treating this like the both sides thing or like there's two normal parties. There are not. This is the whole thing when you get to no labels and stuff where they actually think there's two parties. We can do a middle. No, you're splitting the pro-democracy vote. The authoritarians who want to destroy the government and take it over for their own power, they're not going to split up. They
Right.
may have a fight. DeSantis and Trump may have a fight, but Trump's going to win this thing, and it won't matter. That party wants to grab power by any means necessary, and was willing to tank the economy, destroy the democracy to get it done. And it's them versus the rest of us, and
Right.
the rest of us have to stay together. And I think the problem is, and Stuart said it as I was coming on, that it's very difficult because the authoritarian, it's top down. Whatever dear leader says, we all repeat it, and they're very disciplined about it, more than they ever were. I mean, and the Republicans
Right.
always had very good top down message discipline, but now because it's transformed in this red
Yeah.
hot
Yeah.
authoritarian thing, it's really working. And the Democrats and progressives, look, we've got people who differ on we'll have a spirited debate normally in our primaries about which wing of the party, progressives or the middle
Right.
moderates. We can't have that. People have got to put those kind of inner party you know uh, arguments aside and unify around a guy like Joe Biden, who actually does, I think, understand the language. It's the same way we can talk about protecting and fighting for LGBTQ rights, which which I'm for, but we can also talk about it in the way he does, of the freedom to be who you are and the freedom to love who you want is
Well,
I think, a more inclusive way to talk about it. And so I think it's instructive. Biden is actually, I think, showing the way. Now the question is, since we're not a top-down authoritarian party, will we listen to the leader and
right.
and try to make him as successful in and every operation out there, the union and everything, trying to get the grassroots going and in one direction and take this on. And I think the threat of it is becoming clear just how dangerous Trump and the Republican MAGA-controlled GOP is. It's becoming clear that they're not just crazy, but they're absolutely dangerous. And I think again,
Right.
that's that's the contrast that Biden, I think, presents, and what the rest of us need to get behind.
So, Stuart, on Saturday afternoon, I was sitting there watching one of my kids' lacrosse games, and I was talking to a buddy of mine who, been friends for nearly 25 years at this point, and worked together. Longtime Republican, conservative guy, lives in a red state. And we're talking, and we always have spirited discussions, but it never gets ugly. And he said, "Look, I don't like Trump, but I got to be honest with you, like the left is as crazy as the people on the right are, and there's
Yeah.
just as many of them." And I said, "Look, pal, I love you, but it's just not the case."
Yeah.
Like, I mean, I'm like, and if you don't believe me, like I got plenty of data that proves this. And so we went back and forth, and but he sees the fight totally different, Stuart, which is for him the Supreme Court being 6-3 and the federal judiciary being far more conservative is a defense of American rights. And I think when he's talking about it, it's probably more specifically to business kind of stuff, right? Corporate kind of stuff necessarily than individual rights. But he says he doesn't like Trump, but my guess is if Trump's the nominee, that's where he'll go.
Yeah.
But after
Yeah.
45 minutes, I couldn't move him.
Yeah. Just on the Supreme Court, there's this amazing statistic that I'd never come across before. That there's been 116 Supreme Court justices. Of those, only 5 received votes from senators who represented less than the majority of the voters. And all 5 of those are on the court right now. And 3 of them were appointed by a president who lost the popular vote. So it's a minority of a minority. And I think that part of the big issue here is the sense that we all live in as Americans, a sense of manifest destiny, of inevitability of America, that it has to be this way, and the inability to imagine America changing. But if you just look at like Florida, right, and look at what Ron DeSantis is doing in Florida. Florida had this great history of open government. They led the country in a lot of this stuff. And DeSantis is changing that. They had great educational systems, and DeSantis is changing that. They were open to this great businesses, and DeSantis is changing that. He's going to war because that business interfered with him. So what I would say, I try to say that to it, I have those kind of conversations, is do you want to be a CEO in America, or do you want to be a CEO in Russia?
Right.
I mean, do you want to have to worry? Remember when Trump was president, large corporations literally had comm staff that got up at 4 a.m. to monitor Trump's tweets because their stock and their business could be affected by what he was tweeting. And, one of the great privileges of living in a civil democracy is not having to think about it. You shouldn't have to worry, like, what kind of mood is the leader in? It should have a transparent quality.
And Joe, I think that Stuart makes a good point there. And I try and have as many conversations with people outside what we do because
it's hard to do
very,
and support it.
very easy to live in a bubble. But one of my buddies was saying, I'm so sick of politics being wrapped up into everything, whatever it might be.
Yep.
And that's part of what the bad guys want, right? To Stuart's point about waking up in the morning and thinking about, who's this, who's that? Can Uncle Bob come over for Thanksgiving this year? What do I have to be angry about today? And all of it is to exhaust the body politic.
Authoritarians count on exhaustion. But, I think I've started to think about this. One of the other big differences is that if you really get down to it, the MAGA controlled GOP is all about fear the future. I mean, it's the most anti-American thing ever to fear the future.
Yep.
We've never been a country that feared the future. We were the country that pioneered the future, that took every challenge and we met it, whether it was inventing stuff or something. But we never feared the future. We were going to conquer the damn thing. And this party, they want you to fear it. They want you to fear
Mhm.
And by the way, I think all the like the AI stuff and a lot of the technology is sort of adding to that. So they're sort of playing into this fear people have of the future. And they're making damn sure that you should be very, very afraid. And it's going to take a strong leader, a strong man. Trump is the only guy that can protect you from the stuff you fear in the future. It's not just a fear of the other. I think that helps. They use the other to create that fear. But I really starting to think that we need to the other thing Democrats and the pro democracy coalition need to start articulating is that real American deep down American spirit of facing the future head on. Even in the horrible moments of Hitler and World War II, and we took to the challenge. We weren't afraid of that future. We met it and we conquered it, and we moved ahead and led the world. And I really think that that's part of it. They are. It's not just fear of the other; it's fear of the future. And to use that fear to pull even more people into their orbit, and that's I think something we need to start articulating.
One of
Yeah, so
my
Stuart,
favorite,
go ahead.
one of my favorite clients is Haley Barbour, who you guys know, who
Hmm.
you know was a longtime Politico and then ran for governor of Mississippi. And Haley used to have this thing he would say, you ought to be for the future because it's going to happen anyway.
Right.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
I always thought that made a lot of political sense. You should, try to get out and embrace it.
But I mean, Stuart, that also goes back to the kind of thing that we're up against, which is whether or not it's Ann Applebaum who's written about this or Tim Snyder, which is these
Yep.
sorts of movements are fundamentally anti-future. They can't talk about the future. One, because they can't control it. Two, because they might be responsible for something then. And three, because the only thing they have is, to Joe's point, is the fear. And you can look back at those days, right? On Succession, if anybody watched it on Sunday night, Roman Roy says, F it, right? We'll hit the stop button and we'll go back 20 years. Maybe it'll be fine, right? And they don't want 20 years. They want, 50 or 60 years, to a time where, look, plenty of problems, maybe more problems in some ways than we've ever had. But we've made progress in that time since the 50s and the 1960s, and they want all that to go away. And that's why you see goons like, Tommy Tuberville, the senator from Mississippi or Alabama,
Alabama.
just saying one crazy thing after another this week, and it's only Tuesday because the future scares them. It's not something you can control, and
But,
so once they get it, and also because so long as you're not in the future, you can have the fight, and that's the other part that these movements need, which is a continuous fight. Because without the fight,
it's all about fight. It's the
right?
politics of inevitability versus the politics of just fighting. Um, but we shouldn't lose sight of, and Tuberville's a good reminder of this because Joe could really speak to this. We're really talking about white people for the most part,
Mm-hmm.
and
Right.
this is when Joe ran the race against a convicted, not convicted, but a very credibly accused child molester. It was almost like a Saturday Night Live joke. You go, okay, what would it take to get Republicans to vote for a moderate Democrat? You go, well, what if the guy was a child molester? Yep, nope, 67%, right, Joe? Voted of Republicans voted for Roy Moore.
Oh
Um,
yeah, yeah, absolutely.
and it, they're really, when you look at the heart of this about trying to roll back rights for women, roll back reproductive rights, make illegal abortion drugs, make illegal abortions. It is about going back. So we're not going to teach African American history.
Or the Holocaust.
Yeah.
Right.
And there's just such a pattern to this. It is what Orban is doing in Hungary. It is what Putin has done. Um, and bring back the czar. And, Putin is a perfect. He thinks the greatest tragedy of modern time is the dissolution of the Soviet Union. Which, I mean, really, like, I don't know. I saw Chernobyl. It didn't look so great.
Right.
You know, what 40% of of the people outside of urban areas don't even have a toilet, indoor plumbing in Russia. But still, it's this mythical future. And the 50s wasn't better for a lot of people. It was better in theory. I think it's kind of fanciful for a group of white people.
Right.
But
And it's a
Yeah, I mean, because I mean, I think this is an important thing. Just to nerd out on the history for a second, because Stuart, 20 years before, right? Let's just say 1952, the 52 election. 20 years before, most of the country still lived in the 17th century. Right? Like my grandmother was born in the early 1900s in a house with no water and no
yeah,
electricity, right? She could have been born, she was born in upstate New York. She could have been born in the same village in Ukraine where her father
mhm.
came from, right? It wouldn't have been any different. And so what they saw was like they fought through, my grandparents, your parents fought through the Great Depression. They were born often with nothing or very little. They fought
Mhm.
through the Great Depression. They fought World War II. They won World War II, and then they built literally the modern world. And I mean, I think about that too, which is to Joe's point about the future, which is more has happened in terms of human development since 1945 than in the 7 billion years that happened
Yep.
before we got here,
right.
right? I mean, think about
And
it.
we
We're all better off.
and it was America that helped forge that, and that's what I'm trying to say. It's like that's who we are, and it's this fear thing. That's what's sort of terrifying, I think, in a lot of ways. Not to overdo the fear pun, but that so many Americans have been caught up in such an anti-American fear of the future, because that's what it is. I think it's a really anti-American impulse to fear it and to not put your kids first, to build a better future, to take on these
Mm.
issues, to work together to solve it. And I think Biden gets that, um, in a way that I think is because of his age and his wisdom and his experience.
You know, Joe,
Uh,
we were talking about this. This question of Biden's age. I mean, I think that they should phrase this as Trump and or DeSantis, whoever it is, they want to they want to go back. He wants to go
right.
to the future, and it's not about
Exactly.
his age. It's about what age does he want you to live in. Well, who represents the most hopeful vision of the future?
Right.
And on so many of these issues, they want to go back. And that is a very un-American. You're absolutely right. It is a
Well,
very
I was thinking about
un-American
this. I was
concept.
thinking about this, Stuart, as you were saying that. I interviewed for the Lincoln Project podcast yesterday, Garrett Graff,
I
uh,
love that
uh,
guy. Love
who's
that
got a
guy.
Yeah.
fabulous
Great.
podcast called
Yeah,
Long Shadow. That this season, the first season was about 9/11. This season is about the rise of right wing extremism,
unbelievably good.
uh, and he's fabulous. I know Joe, you've worked with Garrett for a long, long
Yeah.
time. He's just a brilliant
He's a
guy.
great guy.
But Stuart, but we were talking about how the right wing nationalists they were not on just the fringe of politics. They were literally on the fringe of everything, right? They lived in northern Idaho.
Right.
They disappeared. They were all odd in their own way. Now they are part of the Republican coalition, right? For sure. And if you talk about reducing rights for women, right? Reducing rights for African Americans, whether or not that's in voting or education, or taking on the Jews, like this is the same stuff that like the Order and the Aryan nations espoused in the 80s when they were knocking over Brinks trucks and shooting federal officers. I mean, so it's I don't want to know if it's a solid line, Joe, but it's a hell of a dotted line if it's not.
Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, I think part of this is I know everybody still, there's a lot of hand wringing about Biden, uh, and it's just not uh, what we it Biden is going to be the nominee. He is going to be the nominee. He is the leader of the pro democracy movement going into this fight in 2024. You can like it, you can hate it, but that's the way it is. And I think the other side of this coin is going to be Trump is going to be, or somebody very much like him, because that's the only way the nominee be, is going to be on the other side. That is a clear autocracy, authoritarian, in democracy kind of fight against the pro-democracy side. And that's why I started this by saying, look, we've got to put all our doubts and all our fears aside and go fearless into the future, because that's who I think that's where Biden is going to try to take this. And I think it's the right contrast. And hopefully we'll energize enough people with everybody working, the union, et cetera, because we got to do all that work to get people out, to get them registered. And there will be, Generation Z, I think, is really starting to rally to Biden. It's. By the way, you look at No Labels, and they talk about Joe Manchin, or whoever is their, as their ticket. Yeah, we're talking about, so somebody's going to fight for coal and and oil. I mean, for fossil fuel, I mean, regardless of where you think about it, Generation Z ain't buying that third party. I mean, that's what it's kind of like. So all you're going to do is split up the side of people who are a pro democracy with again, somebody sort of like wants to hang in the past. Well, guess who that's going to help? The dictator, the authoritarian, the Trump guy. So no, I mean, look, I know people may be unhappy about this or his age or whatever. It's all overblown. It's all bullshit. He has
Well,
done an incredible job. He really
no,
has.
no. I think that the president has, and that was one thing. Just Stu, just to briefly go back to that conversation I was having with my friend I talked about
Yeah.
earlier. He was like, "This is the worst economy we've had since I can remember," and I was like, "What are you talking about?"
No, it's
I
crazy.
was like, "Real? Like, I'm not trying to be rude, bud, but like, your wife has a good job. You have a good job. You guys live a very nice life. Nothing but your arrows have done nothing but go up since I've known you." Right? So tell me again, when I look at the small town I live on,
Mm-hmm.
in every store and every restaurant, Stuart, has a help wanted sign in it. Everyone is saying starting wage $17 an hour to pull espresso shots or be a
Mm-hmm.
bus, whatever the hell it is,
There's full
right? And
unemployment.
so yeah, there's basically
Unemployment.
functional full employment. So is it I mean, are conservatives just wired to be sort of like, okay, yeah, we're not necessarily against the future, but we're not happy-go-lucky either? Because that's one of those things too that is something that is said with such conviction by this guy that has absolutely no basis in fact.
Yeah, this is. I think it's a really great question, and I wonder about this, and I wonder if you know, I don't think Democrats talk enough about Biden being a great president. And I think that's how they should frame it. They should just go out and say he is a historically great president, and make somebody argue against that. And I can make a very good case that that's true. I mean, he's held the world together in the greatest challenge
Mm-hmm.
to democracy and rule of law since World War II. Without the United States, if Trump were president today, Russians would have a proxy government in Ukraine. In the story, and they'd be looking at Warsaw. And we have this incredible final infusion for infrastructure. All of these big problems actually have been addressed. And it's a kind of timidity that if I could say anything to Democrats, it would be, walk with confidence.
Right.
You're in the
Joe,
majority.
walk with confidence, Joe.
Yeah, I
I try.
mean, you're right. It's like we say at Resolute Square. You're right.
I'm
They're wrong.
feeling very right now. Yeah, yeah.
I mean, don't be afraid of that. Don't get into arguing. Well, he's not so bad.
Right.
Yeah, go out there and say he's a great president. Make that the terms of the argument.
Yeah, because Joe, we
Well,
know
it's
what's the
true.
worst that can happen, which is Trump can get nominated again, and win the presidency. So
No, and
what's the worst
he
that can
has
happen? We lose the
accomplished.
country.
Yeah, and he accomplished more in the first 2 years than just about any president and in any that any of us can remember in terms of what he actually got done and and the infrastructure that's starting to happen around the country. I mean, it is actually, and particularly given the obstruction of the McCarthy, McConnell. I mean, the entire MAGA controlled Republican Party, Trump out there. to get any of it done with only, slight, basically a tie in the Senate and a House that's like, even when Pelosi was Speaker, was like, barely had the votes to get anything done. He got a hell of a lot done. And a lot of it was really big stuff that got us through the pandemic and look at the job creation, the wage growth. And I do think part of this is that the it just shows how bad journalism and cable news has gotten at actually getting facts to anybody, right? I mean, there is no the people are getting their facts from. I was talking to my son today, and he yelled at me because he said, what really screwed everything up was the New York Times and every mainstream media source starting to put up paywalls. So the only place people are getting any information is
Hmm?
from free lying crap sites on the right. And I think
And why was he yelling at you for this? Why was he blaming you for
because
this?
he
Because
was like
Joe's the
saying like
father of
you don't
of
get it,
modern
Dad.
ad tech.
It's like one of those you don't get it, Dad. You don't get what's really going on out there. But I think and I told him, no, I get that. You're right. But that's what I think has happened is that we've walled off any real information. No one's watching any of the news, and they're so bad at doing the both sides is that they're not reporting the facts in a way that people get them. Instead, it's the Republicans say the jobs report is bullshit. Democrats say it's a great jobs report, and then you got to figure it out for yourself. But
I mean,
I
let's
mean,
just
I
think
don't know
about
about
this
you.
because you guys have bought billions and billions of dollars worth of media in your time, right?
Yes,
When you started, it was broadcast television and
Yeah.
radio. Then you added
right,
cable, right?
right,
Then the internet came in, right? Then social media came in. The internet, came in. Now you got people cutting the cord, and now Joe, you mentioned Gen Z earlier. You've got, I don't know what the makeup of Gen Z is as far as the number of percentage of population they represent. They don't watch television, and they sure as hell don't watch local news. They don't watch national news, right? They don't
right,
watch CNN or Fox unless they're sitting in the White House or Capitol Hill, right? Like they don't unless it's
right.
part of their job. Well,
There
first of all,
are no,
unless it's
there
part of
are
your
no,
job, why would you watch any of that crap,
yeah,
right? But
there are no gatekeepers.
right,
When people write histories of the Vietnam War, they always point to the turning point when Walter Cronkite first referred to it as a
Right.
quag,
right.
and that was, a turning point for America. Um, and I think it is a huge issue. If I was a billionaire, one of the I would try to do is promote local journalism because I can just see when I was still doing campaigns how candidates were doing stuff that they never would have done if there had been more reporters. I mean, when you were in Sacramento, you saw a tremendous streaking of reporters. Like
Like year over year, it just
Yeah.
yeah, and that is so corrupt. So, um, like one of the Pulitzer Prizes went to a nonprofit journalism, Mississippi Today outlet in Mississippi, that uncovered this giant welfare scandal that Brett Favre was all involved in.
hmm hmm
Had there not been this
Right.
nonprofit, that never would have come out. Absolutely wouldn't have come out. Um, there's another one in Vermont called VT Digger. And this is a hopeful new model that we're stumbling our way into. But I just go back to this, all of these journalists, they were brought up in a world in which objectivity was the greatest good. And I think it's inadequate to this moment.
But
And a lot of,
I think about this though, Stuart, because and we should also mention Tara McGowan and her
Hmm.
outfit, the Courier Newsroom.
right?
Colorado has a great independent news
Yeah.
service. The Texas Tribune has, these folks. To your point, they all do great. They all do great work, and they all work their tails off. Right? There's not a lot. There's no moss laying on these people. Um, but to your point, Stu, just to go back, even like think about the technology on the 2000 campaign. Right? We were still laying phone lines in the filing center. Do they even have filing centers anymore? Like I don't even know. Probably not, because
You
why
know,
would you set all that crap up if everybody's just going to be on their phone anyway? But
you know,
that's the point too, is that, you used to say, okay, the reporters used to get, pissy because they were hearing the same speech 3, 4 times a day. Like, we got a job to do, you got a job to do, right? And they got it, but they also were going to go find Stuart, they were to talk to you, or Joe, they were going to talk to you to get something a little bit more, but they were typically going to report that straight. Now, anytime somebody said, "Oh, the leftward bias of the media," I'm like, look at how many Republicans get elected in spite of the left media. So, like, that's
Yeah.
not really a good excuse, right? And
you know,
I always found that there were absolutely some reporters that I dealt with over the years, but for the most part, if a reporter was good, they wanted the story, and they wanted the story right, because the last thing in the world they wanted to do was get it wrong.
yeah, you know
Yeah.
what? I was writing about. I'm sorry, just one second about this. I was saying about it in the 2000 campaign. That was still when the New York Times would go online at midnight every day, and our phones would ring. It was 11 o'clock in Austin. About 11:10, our phones would start ringing, and it would be people, journalists who had read the Times, and basically the Times was an assignment editor for national journalism, because if they wrote about a story, it validated it, and it went on. And there are no news cycles now, and there's a lot of positive about it, I think, but it's we're in a transitional phase where we don't have it's like sort of where college football is with paying players.
Hmm.
It is, yes, you need to pay, but it is a weird system. And right now, there still is this information sort of morass out there, and I think it's really unclear what's going to evolve.
No, and I say
Which
this
is why
Right.
we're
is
And
doing this.
I
I mean,
agree,
we're doing
yeah.
Stuart,
this.
but I think
Go ahead, Joe.
but I think the right filled that morass and it adds to it every day. In other words, like, I don't know, you open up your
I think
email
that's right.
and you've got Patriot Right, the Christian Right. I mean, there are like a zillion emails I'm getting from different, and they're all saying Biden's too old. I mean, like, or did
Mhm.
you see Biden stunt? And by the way, when you actually go click on the link, if you do, um, you can never
You have to go get
find
a
the
new
picture of
computer.
him stumbling. Right? Yeah, yeah. No, but you know what I'm saying? It's just sort of like, no, it's a trick to get you to buy the headline and not, like, you're
Right.
too busy and you don't look at it. They got this stuff down, and I think that's part of how people don't know that the economy is great, because they're getting told every day on social media and fragmented in their own little silo how bad it is, even though it's going okay. For them, it's a
Yeah.
really
Look, I mean,
astonishing
the,
feat that they've been able to
the,
pull that off.
MAGA media, sprouts up faster than mushrooms after a rainstorm. And,
Yeah,
they're on it, to your point, Joe. And remember too that, like, they don't do it alone. They got friends in St. Petersburg, in Riyadh, in Beijing,
yeah,
in Pyongyang, right? They got a
they
lot of
do.
friends helping them do this stuff. In fact, I had lunch with a friend of mine today who is in a world that has nothing to do with what we do. And he says he's on a very specific part of Twitter that is not at all attached to politics in no way. And he said when Musk took over, he's like, my feed is full of right wing wacko stuff. I didn't
Wow.
ask for it. I didn't go looking for it.
Right.
So that was, again, anecdotal, but it says to me, they know what they're doing. Musk knows what he's doing with the algorithm, right? And they're pushing this stuff to this guy who's an otherwise normal, decent family guy working hard, and he's getting this stuff. And for every one of him, is there somebody else out there? It's probably not one to one who sees that stuff and does click the link and does go down the rabbit hole. So it is absolutely, what the Russians would call active measures, right? They are
Yeah.
absolutely doing it on purpose. All right. Well, on that happy note, Stuart, give us one last thought before we get out of here.
um, Look, because I'm sort of obsessed with it, but I also think it is a turning point in history. I am watching Ukraine very, very carefully. I don't know. Last night there was really, I think, will go down in military history. It's a historic night where the Russians had come up with these hypersonic missiles that supposedly were unstoppable. And God love American technology, because of the Patriot battery, they were able to shoot down every one.
Right.
And I think, time doesn't move linearly. Some years and some months are more important. And I think the next 2 months in Ukraine are going to have sort of a battle of Britain historic quality to it. That if the Ukrainians can break through, and if they can rout the Russians, and if they can keep the West with them, and which increasingly seems to be the case. I was so impressed with what Germany finally did. What that is going to mean for democracy, I think it's just going to have such historic consequences.
And we've seen the UK's all in. I think Zelensky was actually
Yep.
in England, maybe over the weekend.
Yeah, he was.
You know,
Yep.
Yeah.
and you know, there was a big
These Storm
democracy,
Shadow missiles that they've
right,
given them now. I mean,
right.
this is like,
Right.
I
There
want
was a
to.
big pro-democracy summit that was more like a NATO-aligned thing in Copenhagen this past weekend, where, you know, the who's who of security leaders, you know, were either there or video. I know Pelosi spoke. I know Zelensky spoke. So, like, you know, that seemed to be, you know, a very good thing. All right, Joe, how about you?
I think the G7 summit, Biden going over there, and then I think clearly coming back and dealing with the debt ceiling mess because the Republicans are going to, I think, are still going to do everything they can to default. But I think it may demonstrate again that it's, you know, forget about Biden's age, look at what he's doing. You know, we all forget about that trip or a lot of people who worry about his age, forget about that trip to Ukraine he did. You know, like a 10-hour train
Yeah,
trip,
I'm tired
got
reading
out
about
there, went wall to wall, meeting after meeting, held the
Stuart,
alliance
that's a
together.
book you should write.
Yeah.
it. Yeah,
Yes.
that was an
But I'm just
incredible
saying,
story.
yeah,
Night
but I'm
Trade
saying
to Kyiv.
I think we may be about to see another period like that with him, where he you know, pulls off some pretty big stuff with Alliance and the G7, and then gets back here and handles business with these just asshole Republicans in their plan. Yeah, I just think McCarthy. I mean, it's all such chicken shit, but it's with a purpose. They chaos works for them. That's why I'm still worried that they may default on purpose. You know, they may push it over the edge and try to blame him. But I'm watching those two things.
Um, Annette Damey writes, Donna Deegan just won the mayoral race in Jacksonville, Florida. That is a big,
Yeah,
big
it's
win
big.
in a big, big town in Florida. A big
That's
FU to Meatball over just west of there in Tallahassee. So that is huge news. So thank
yeah.
you,
I
Annette,
had
for putting that on the screen.
Yeah, that's great news. We just had her on the Deegan on the That Trippy Show podcast as a special guest last week to help try to, you know, give her some exposure, and it's
Well,
great
I
to see
mean,
that
clearly
win.
that
That's
you put
amazing.
her,
Yeah, it didn't have
That
anything to
was
do with it,
you
but
put her
no,
over the
no, no,
top.
no,
it
no,
was a
no. Joe, we've just said take credit for
Take
things.
credit. What they say in
but
Texas, shoot at
no, she
everything,
was
take credit
really
for anything
impressive.
that
I was
falls.
very impressed with her on the, you know, I mean, I always already was impressed. That's why I wanted her, you know, wanted to have her on the podcast. But she was very, very impressive. She's going to be a great mayor. That's great news.
No, and I think that's great news. Also, I think another good example of if you have a normal, decent Democrat, both as a decent candidate and a decent individual running versus a crazy
Hmm.
Republican, the decent normal Democrat will win, which I think we'll probably see hopefully next year as well. Last thing for me is I'm just looking at the debt ceiling too. You know, I started calling around to reporters in January saying, you know, you might want to call the chamber or some of the big banks or some of these big corporations because you know this thing's going to go. It's either going to go down altogether, or it's going to go to the wire. And a lot of them were like, you know, that sounds like a pretty good idea. Talking to some friends in that, you know, in that sector, oh, it'll be fine, it'll be fine, it'll be fine. And now you're starting to see the headlines Wall Street, very nervous. Corporate America, very nervous. Like sometimes, guys, if people are telling you things, you should believe them. When MAGA says we want to tank the economy, believe them. That's what they
Right.
want, to Joe's point. And so, you know, McCarthy, remember, McCarthy's only real constituency has ever been well heeled donors and chamber types. He doesn't, his conference maybe some people like him personally, but for the most part, he's not a popular guy. He doesn't have any real constituency to lay back on, and so it'll be interesting to see the incredible pressures on him between the crazy and the money, right?
Hmm.
And my
Yeah.
bet is that both those pressures will twist him. You're on mute, Stu. Yeah,
What's your prediction, Reed? What do you think's going to happen?
uh,
I got to hold you to that before you go. What do you think?
uh, I think that if McCarthy thinks he can get Democratic votes to pass something, he'll take them
Hmm.
because the money guys won't let it. They'll be
Yeah.
like, "What are you doing? You can't tank the economy." And if it costs him his speakership, so be it. But,
Yeah.
of course, because every time I make a prediction, just as I said Hillary Clinton would win 340 electoral votes, probably not going to happen. So anyway, all right, before we go, Stuart, thank you. Joe, thank you. Everybody tune in, download, rate 5 stars for that Trippi show. Please tune in, rate 5 stars for the LP podcast. Rick will be back next week. Please tune in and listen to the Enemies List podcast as well. Thanks to Sam, thanks to Lisa, everybody else out there, and we will see you next week. Bye,
Thanks,
guys.
guys.
Thanks, everybody. Take care.